空を越えてラララ星の彼方行くぞアトムジェットの限り心優しいラララ科学の子みんな旅に鉄腕アトム
Hello, and welcome back to our journey through the works of Osamu Tezuka. Last time, we took a look at his beginnings in the 1940s. We saw him make a lot of personal firsts and start to experiment with different genres. We got introduced to many of his stars and recurring characters, and we saw him reuse a few ideas over and over again. This time around, we're into the 1950s, an era I think is the most important time of Tezuka's career. If you put what are probably his top 5 most famous series in a lineup, 4 of them started here. It was a big decade and there's a lot to talk about, but we won't be covering the entire decade in one go. I could have made the 50s one giant video, but I decided to split it in half for easy digestion. Funnily enough though, those 4 big series were actually all in the early 50s, so this segment is still rather stacked. But before we start, let me remind you of the format. I mentioned it before in the 40s video, but series that have enough adaptations get their own videos where I'll dive into them proper. So if you're looking forward to certain long-running famous series being talked about in this video, they will, but only briefly. They'll get their own time to shine later. I'd also like to recommend watching the 40s video if you haven't already, not only as an introduction to this video series, but because there's going to be a couple of references to Tezuka's past works. Apart from that, this video will be me going over everything I can about Tezuka's works in the early 50s. I won't be able to cover everything he ever made, but I can do most of it. And I remind you that there's a general non-spoiler approach, with the exception of works that are too short to talk about without spoilers, or rare special occasions. With that said, let's begin, as we see where Tezuka actually started to really make a name for himself. In the 40s, we saw Tezuka dabble in adapting classic fairy tales, a la Four Fences of the Forest and Hans the Golden Hare. Throughout the 50s, we're going to see him make more of an effort at adapting literature. Tezuka said in interviews that, at the time, manga was mainly seen as kid stuff. It wasn't taken very seriously as an art form, and the idea of manga aimed at adults wasn't really a thing yet. These literary adaptations were his attempt at making people change their mind, and to see it as a versatile and respectable medium for all ages. And to start off, he'd adapt the classic German story of Faust. Now, Faust is a pretty old tale with several versions, but Tezuka is specifically going off the adaptation by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, if I'm pronouncing that correctly? I swear I've always heard it as Goth or something. Now, I'm not a Faust expert, and I don't know which version of the story is the most common. I think most people know about the base premise, but not necessarily the specifics or differences version to version. It seems like it varies a good bit. So let's start off with an overview of the original story, both in Goethe's and Tezuka's Faust. God and his angels are in heaven when a devil named Mephistopheles comes and makes a bet that he can tempt Faust to sell his soul and drag him to hell. Now, Faust is an older man. He's highly intelligent, learned in many fields, but he feels the infinite knowledge he wants is forever outside his reach, and thus he grows tired of living. Mephistopheles then appears to him, initially as a black dog, and makes a deal. Faust gets to use the devil's power, but when he finally truly feels satisfied, he's sent to hell. The deal is struck, he's turned younger, and the story unfolds. Now the details after this change a bit. In part 1 of the original version, he meets a girl named Margaret or Gretchen, has relations with her, and eventually it ends badly. Then in part 2, Faust has found himself in a position in royal court, goes to the Greek underworld to have a fling with Helen of Troy, and eventually makes his own country. Tezuka essentially takes these 2 parts and combines them into a single story. So when Faust becomes young again, he finds himself in a royal court right away, and begins seeking the affection of the now Princess Margaret. The Helen of Troy and bad ending for Margaret bits still happen, just woven into a singular narrative. That being said, Tezuka's Faust is pretty toned down compared to the original. He wanted manga to be taken more seriously, but not to the point of including infanticide. Also, Mephistopheles keeps the dog disguise, so for 90% of the story, he's Faust's cute furry sidekick. It makes him a little hard to take seriously. but as an adaptation of Faust, this was a fairly decent read. It certainly doesn't have the drama the original work had, but you still get some good characterization for Faust himself. You'd think merging 2 acts together would be bad and messy, but I feel Tezuka pulled it off quite well. It's a solid attempt at adapting the story for all ages. And for an interesting note to leave us off on, this is actually the first of 3 adaptations of Faust Tezuka would make. 1971's 100 Tales and 1988's Neo Faust will see us revisit the story later. It'll be interesting to see how they all compare. But we've got a lot of time before that, so continuing on, we have Fushigi Ryokoki, The Wonderful Journey. And if you remember the concept of Tezuka stars and how Tezuka viewed his characters as actors, well, this actually starts with the behind-the-scenes making of the story in the manga. They're shown in a film set where they're shooting the scenes and showing how they did some of the special effects as if it were a movie. It's pretty neat, and it shows that Tezuka's characters as actors thing isn't just an analogy, it's canon, if you will. So with that revelation out of the way, the plot starts with good old Tezuka star Shinsaku Ban on a plane to travel the world. He was supposed to be with his nephew, frequently recurring Tezuka star Kenichi, but the young boy missed boarding. However, he didn't miss the plane and decided to just grab onto the outside. This doesn't end well, as Kenichi finds himself falling into the ocean and actually dying. The only problem is, according to the spirit Mr. Jordan, the Heavenly Record book shows Kenichi wasn't meant to die today, so there's a bit of a problem when his body goes missing. Making the best out of a bad situation, Kenichi and his spirit named Halloween decide to pursue Ban and try to find him a new body. On top of all of that, there's a big plot involving a treasure-seeking rich old man hiring some people to obtain a gold statue, 2 bumbling thieves after it for themselves, a scheme involving the old man's lost daughter, and Kenichi getting involved by possessing dead, or mostly dead, things. The story here actually has a couple moving pieces, with Kenichi and Ban being more side characters to the narrative. I think I'd say The Wonderful Journey is fine, but feels a bit messy. There's a lot going on, and it can feel a little unfocused in some elements. Some things just happen, but don't really matter a lot. Like this part in China where a character gets kidnapped by a demon, and then it turns out to all just be a dream that doesn't factor into anything. I did like how the setting continuously changed as the characters made their way around the world though, keeps things fresh. But this manga wasn't entirely original. In fact, Tezuka says it was inspired by the 1941 movie Here Comes Mr. Jordan. The movie is about a boxer who gets into a plane crash, an angel mistakenly thinks he's supposed to die instead of survive, and then when his body gets cremated, the boxer's spirit possesses other people to try and get his life back. You can see the similarities in the premise, as well as a similar name. Not a bad movie, by the way. Robert Montgomery does a fine job. And for a fun bit, remember in my 40s video where I pointed out the times Tezuka put in characters that look like but are legally distinct from Disney characters? Well, when the game makes their way to America, Kenichi possesses a fox, and there's a subplot about negotiating with Disney representatives for his movie rights. The Disney nods aren't stopping, and if anything, they're gonna get a little more explicit in a bit. But as for The Wonderful Journey, it's more like the fine enough journey. Next is something a bit shorter. Ogan Toshi or Kogane Toshi, the Golden City, opens with passengers on a ship telling stories to pass the time. An old man starts telling a tale, and the plot follows it as Kenichi dreams along. We're introduced to the legend of the Golden City, a place located in the middle of a dangerous area, but is brimming with food. It's also well guarded by its female population, who also do all the work, while the males are seen as inherently lazy and useless. Kenichi dreams himself into the role of main character of the story, and tries to change the weird society for the better with the help of a male citizen of the city. Initially, I thought this was a really random story that didn't make a lot of sense, and I didn't like how Tezuka gave all the women the same design that made it hard to tell who was who. But by the end, I figured out what he was doing, and now I think it's kinda clever. Maybe see if you can guess the twist if you read it yourself. This one was short and initially middling, but it grew on me. Hirahara Taiheki, or maybe it's Hagen Taiheki, I'm seeing that pronunciation too, has the official English name of the Peaceful Plains, but is also sometimes called the Plains of Abisekahara. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to call this one. It's actually the first full-length work of Tezuka's that takes place in a historical Japanese setting, like with samurai and stuff. It's kind of funny that it took him so long considering we've had the jungle, sci-fi, and the American Wild West. Taking place around the mid-1800s, it follows a samurai named Monza. In his lord's territory, there lies the Abu Sekihara Plains, an undeveloped wilderness that he believes can yield prosperity if they clear it and work the land. No one believes it's worth the effort though, and thus he's tasked to do it himself. Taking his retainer and sister with him, he has a lot of work to do in order to convince the nearby townspeople and to deal with the local gang. The story actually takes place across a decent amount of time, skipping forward months or years to show how the plains progress and how the town deals with various situations. These fields have just about everything possible go wrong, but Monza and the town find a way to move forward. I thought this was pretty well written. It's got themes of perseverance and struggling to achieve a goal, it's got some action, and it's got the occasional joke. The characters of Monza and his sister are likable in their steadfast belief in their cause, and unexpectedly, the development of the gang leader who initially hates Monza but grows to respect him was the highlight. Tezuka did a good job with his characters in this. I thought this was a good read, and it's nice to see Tezuka begin writing more historical Japanese settings, which he'll use a good bit going forward. And now for something a bit weirder, but also a bit important. Taiga Hakase no Chin Ryoko, or Dr. Tiger's Strange Journey, is pretty aptly named. It stars the baseball team, the Tigers, led by their intelligent captain, Dr. Tiger. The story starts with a random kingdom and a prince inheriting the throne at a young age. The prince's advisors disagree on how to raise him, and it results in him only studying and having no fun. This changes when the Tigers arrive and show the prince the joy and value of sports. And then, they're just thrown into a pod and launched to another part of the world. They arrive in some Arabian country where they entertain the king and play against court magicians. Then they're off to another part of the world where more weird stuff happens. This is indeed Dr. Tiger's Strange Journey. Things happen, baseball gets played, and in the end, somehow all problems are solved. I wasn't a big fan of this one. I thought it was a bit too random for my liking, and certain plot points feel a little contrived. The characters also aren't overly interesting, having little time to make each individual member of the team stand out. They mostly just blend together. Maybe it has some entertainment value because of the randomness, but it wasn't for me. So why did I call this work important? Well, it's a common misconception that Jungle Emperor was Tezuka's first non-newspaper serialization. According to Tezuka, in the end-of-volume interview for New World of Lulu for some reason, people make this mistake a lot even when he was doing these interviews, so don't blame anyone for thinking that. But at any rate, Tezuka's first non-newspaper serialization with Talkabot-style chapters was Dr. Tiger. So there you go. We've reached an important step in Tezuka's career and clarified a misunderstanding prevalent even decades ago. But let's make things more interesting. Remember that sci-fi trilogy Tezuka started in the 40s and at this point would still be writing? Well, he conceived of a counterpart animal trilogy that would mirror his works and share common elements and themes. A duo of trilogies. Now, if I'm reading this right, he'd only write one work in its original form while recycling the other two's ideas, and according to interviews, this is one of them. Dr. Tiger has loose connections to Next World, I think, which we haven't gotten to yet. I'm not entirely sure what Tezuka's turnover rate is on his ideas. Maybe he had Next World completely planned out by now. I know he had to do some rewrites, but we'll get there when we get there. This isn't confusing at all. Both Next World and Dr. Tiger do feature a country called the Star Nation though, so there is a bit of a link. I don't know. The core he described this also seems to misstate Jungle Emperor as coming out in the 40s. By the way, Jungle Emperor is Lost World's counterpart. Sometimes Tezuka's interviews are just a little wrong because he's recalling things that happened years ago and he misstates things. Other times he just doesn't give full context, so he makes his interviews a little confusing. This makes the whole process of fact-checking his stuff really fun at times, but I want to put forward a theory. I think Tezuka is wrong that Dr. Tiger's Strange Journey was inspired by the Animal Trilogy, that he's mixing it up with his next work. The actor of Dr. Tiger returns in Kuruta Jungle, or The Crazy Jungle, and this time as an actual doctor. One night a mysterious bright object is seen over Africa, and some country gets so worried about it being a new type of missile or nuclear weapon that they send Hameg to investigate. Hameg arrives in the jungle pretending to be an entomologist and runs into Dr. Tiger and his son Kenichi, who are treating the natives. Hameg explores around and returns to the village with a massively oversized hand. He claims this happened when a strange beast stunned him, and when Dr. Tiger and Kenichi investigate, the beast's properties turn out to be true, and it causes chaos in the whole village. A good premise, but at only 16 to 17 pages, there's not a lot of time to explore it. Ultimately though, the stated moral is not to be so paranoid about deadly weapons to the point where we ignore more concerning issues like illness. This likens it a lot more closely to Next World, as we'll see, and since it actually has something to do with the plague or virus motif the interview mentioned, it leads me to think this is the true member of the Animal Trilogy. To add more conspiracy nonsense to this is a story about a fear-driven disease of sorts that enlarges body parts, which reminds me of the premise for Fear Fungus from 45, so this may also be a retooling of that story idea. Enough of all that though, let's move on to something simpler. Ujigami Sama no Hi, Fire of the Guardian Deity, is another short story. This time around, it's about a rural Japanese village that's visited by some scientists to investigate the local firewalk ceremony. Every year, at night on a certain day, a line of fire can be seen on the village mountain, but when investigated, there's nothing there. It explores the town's legends about the ceremony, how some villagers don't like people interfere with their sacred tradition, and it shows Tezuka's fondness for science when the truth is revealed. It's an alright little story about demystifying phenomena, but the mystery wasn't given that much time to be interesting or in-depth. But what is interesting is the next thing we're looking at, and in a way, it's one of the funniest things Tezuka would ever do, in my opinion. Manga Daigaku, or Manga University, was written by Tezuka as a way to teach his readers how manga is made and how to make it themselves. According to his postscript interview, he wasn't sure it would sell well if it was just about teaching, so he also threw in some actual stories, which take up more than the educational parts. Now, I find this funny because Tezuka made this in 1950. In a matter of months, he started to publish really influential works, and in a few years, he basically revolutionized manga as a whole. This is like if Tolkien wrote a guide on how to write fantasy stories, and then made The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I'm not going to look up if he actually did or didn't do that, the analogy stands. By this point, Tezuka was doing well as a mangaka, he was a good source for this info, but with the hindsight of how big he'd eventually become, there's a bit of comedy in him giving lessons about something he himself would shortly revolutionize. He made educational works based on a standard, and then shattered that standard just for fun. But let's explore Tezuka's teachings here, and see what lessons he had for early manga. Manga University starts with a lecture from the school principal. He teaches about different sized pens, he describes how manga is drawn larger and then reduced down in size for newspapers and magazines, and then he goes into the drawing process as he illustrates a cowboy that takes us into the first story. It features a human cowboy during the Civil War, arriving at a town where animals walk upright and talk alongside humans. It's a decent story, just not overly important. The principal comes in at the end though, saying this was an example of violent stories, which goes into a discussion of not using vulgar language in your works. The second story is a fairy tale-like one, where a poor man gets 3 wishes that must be based around his wallet, and he uses the first one to become rich and faces the consequences. The story is maybe important to us because right here, on this panel, we can see a particular pattern on this couch. That's right, it's the massive Tezuka star, Hyotensughi, making his first published appearance, according to the official Tezuka site at the time of writing. In my video on the 40s, I point out what might be an earlier Hyotensughi cameo on a page of Metropolis. Now granted, that cameo doesn't feel as clear to me as this one here. It could just be a random low detail face that kinda looks like Hyotensughi, whereas this example is clearly the character in question. I'll leave it up to you to draw your own conclusion, but the point is, this is maybe the famous cameo character's first published appearance. After the fairy tale, Tezuka goes into the printing process at the time, and then into the format of 4-comma works, which is, of course, where he got started with Machan's diary. And you know what? To demonstrate 4-comma, he brings back Machan for some new stories. He even brings back Chinen the Monk and some Guchan stories too. It's neat. It's like, hey, I started with this simple format too, and then I kept improving. You can too. Tezuka then gives us one last story about poisoned milk causing mass panic, which either features Tezuka star Duke Red in a dress, or there's a female counterpart to the actor. Then he closes the book with steps on how to publish. Manga University isn't the most entertaining read in my opinion. Its stories are generally just okay. But it is interesting to see steps and guidelines for early manga creation from this time period from the guy who would define manga itself. It's a neat little time capsule in a way. This also won't be the last time Tezuka makes something like this, as we'll be seeing other educational works in the future. But now, it's November of 1950, and Tezuka's about to release one of his most iconic works, Jungle Taite, translated as Jungle Emperor, but commonly known as Kimba the White Lion. We won't be talking too much about this particular manga here, as it's the first series that's gained its own video, but for the sake of this one, let's at least get the base premise. In terms of the story, we're introduced to the White Lion Panja, who rules the African jungle. After he repeatedly attacks the local tribes to help free captured animals, the tribes hire Hamek as a hunter to kill him. And he succeeds. Capturing Panja's mate, she gives birth on a ship to Leo, a little lion, white like his father. Leo escapes the ship, eventually makes his way back to the jungle, and, well, I'll leave further details to the actual video talking about it, but the story is a lot weirder than you're probably thinking. But let's bring back the concept of the Animal Trilogy. If interviews are to be believed, Jungle Emperor was the only manga finished for that initial concept. The other two got recycled into different works, but Jungle Emperor was made to parallel Lost World. How does it do that? Well, Heme killed Panja for the reward of a special stone, and the end plot of the manga revolves around journeying to a special place where the stone originates, where they find... spoilers. It's not one-to-one, but there's similarities. In terms of its writing, Jungle Emperor is also an early example of Tezuka delving into a developing plot and cast of characters. Leo, the main lead, grows up as the manga goes on. He's a lot more realized than many previous Tezuka protagonists. It makes it a bit of a shame how all the adaptations of this manga throw out that aspect and usually give us a more watered down and boring experience. But I'll save my thoughts on that and other things for the eventual Jungle Emperor video. Next up is Ashi Oto Onsen, Footsteps in the Hot Spring. Now we all know by now that Tezuka's characters are actors playing roles, but for this short manga, they're actors for a stage performance. The story takes place on an actual stage with props and scenery. It starts when two Japanese men from some time ago find a hot spring in the woods that the animals like to use. They get into a disagreement over monopolizing it versus leaving it as is so the animals can also use it, and ultimately the spring is left alone. We then get a second act in more modern times, at the time, where two researchers discover it and they also quarrel over the spring. It's a simple manga story-wise, but I like the idea of the stage play setup and accidentally knocking over props and stuff. If a series came out that really committed to it, I'd read it. Imagine reading a climactic fight and a stage light goes out or something. There's some potential here. Kanoko no Oendancho, or Kanoko the Cheerleader, is a short 8-page story about a girl who borrows her brother's outfit for a play. Said outfit is part of her brother's cheering gear, and when his cheermates come to get him to hype up the baseball team, they instead convince Kanoko to take her brother's place disguised as a man. There's really not much to say about this one, it just is what it is. Add Italian and Tezuka portray women in men's roles, it's gonna hit its climax soon. But our next entry is a bit more substantial. It's time to cap off Tezuka's sci-fi trilogy with Kitaru Piki Sekai, Next World. Now, in previous early Tezuka works, there have been cases where you had to cut out plot elements or pages due to publisher limitations. You may recall this as part of the reason why Metropolis had some elements that feel underdeveloped. While Next World would consist of around 300 pages when published, Tezuka originally wrote it to have 1,000. This can be seen in places, as Next World feels particularly larger in scope in comparison to his previous works. Though, as expected, this also leaves a lot of elements feeling underutilized. Stick with me here as I try to give the basics. The manga opens on Dr. Yamadato exploring Bate Island, which has acted as a nuclear test site for the Star Nation. The island is filled with many strange things because of the constant nukes, and Yamadato captures a specific sample in order to warn the rest of the world. Bond witnesses him bring the sample home, and upon investigation, discovers it's a new type of creature called a Fumoon, capable of telepathy and controlling gravity. The Fumoon, later named Rococo, then escapes and sends Bond off somewhere distant with their gravity powers. Rococo is then found and rescued by Kenichi, Bond's nephew, who bonds with her. This all doesn't stop Yamadato from going to an international nuclear conference to warn the world that their tests are having consequences, but no one listens to him as the rival powers of the Star Nation and the Uran Union spark conflict. The representatives Notolet and Rednoff, too concerned with politics and war to worry about any global crisis. Notolet's daughter Kokoa is also the girlfriend of Rock, a local newspaper reporter, who gets caught up in an assassination attempt and is sent to the Uran Union as a star spy. Meanwhile, Rednoff sends a message to his son Ivan to work in the secret underground factory for safety. While intended for a management position, Ivan's good nature makes him choose to work with the captured prisoners, where he finds Rock and Bon, who ended up there after the incident with Rococo. To top it all off, Ivan's girlfriend Papaya is a detonator for Kokoa. And while all this is going on, the Fumin are working behind the scenes, Lamp is a homeless opportunist working to gain wealth, Kenichi is trying to find his uncle, the Star Nation and the Uran Union move closer to war, and Yamato is treated as a crazy person only to discover an even greater threat coming from space. If that all sounds like a bit too many things for a base premise, that's because it is. Next World has an extensive cast and several plots all converging in and out of each other to form its narrative. It feels very ambitious in comparison to Tezuka's previous works, and maybe trying to do too much. While Kenichi is essentially the main character, we spend equal amounts of time with others, to the point this manga almost doesn't have one. In general, I wouldn't say any part of the story is pointless, as they all seem to build up or lead to other things, but Tezuka himself said in an interview that he looks back on the first half unfavorably. I wish we could see what the original draft of this story was like. With 3 times the length, it might have been something really impressive. As for the version we got, I'd say it's still enjoyable considering. It has a very Cold War feel, the Star Nation and Uran Union being very blatantly America and Russia, the representatives too obsessed with conflict against each other to look at the global big picture, and their nuclear experiments giving way to the Full Moon, a whole new power. Tezuka also throws in dialogues about the places of women. Kokoa is useless for basically the whole story because she's been called her whole life, while her counterpart Proponia is an accomplished scientist because she's taken seriously. And so continues Tezuka's feminist messages in his works. And to bring it back to the Dr.Tiger stuff, both stories feature the fear of nuclear war and enemy powers getting in the way of solving real issues, like diseases or all the stuff in Next World. This is why I think Crazy Jungle is the Link story, not Strange Journey. Oh yeah, I gotta mention these 2 weird things surrounding this manga. The first has to do with the sci-fi trilogy as a whole. So I already mentioned how Metropolis is directly inspired by Metropolis, albeit just the title and the image of a female robot, but Lost World was also actually inspired by the Arthur Conan Doyle novel, although Tezuka only did the story featured dinosaurs, and once again borrowed the cool sounding title. Next World, or Kitaru Beki Sakai, faced accusations of plagiarism with the 1936 film The World to Come, based on the H.G. Wells book, which had the same name in Japanese. In interviews, Tezuka says he hadn't seen the movie when he wrote Next World, and frankly, I don't think the 2 pieces of media have much in common, or at least not enough to make any claims of Tezuka copying the movie. But at any rate, all 3 of the sci-fi trilogy are somehow related to other sci-fi media. But after Tezuka clarifies that in his interview about Next World, he gives another interesting fact about it. He's rather vague on the details, but apparently, someone sold the manuscript without Tezuka's permission, and some guys republished Next World, I think with a different name. Tezuka says it was colorized particularly poorly, and asks anyone to throw out their copies if they have one. I don't have any images of this Next World bootleg, but I think it's a fun tidbit of this particular manga. Maybe I'll find it at some point. But back to the main topic, while I like Next World enough, I think it could have been better if it was simplified further. Cut out some of the plot points and characters and have a more defined protagonist instead of constantly jumping between several. Maybe turn it into an animated movie in 1980, see how that goes. Still, considering how much Tezuka would remake works, I really wish he gave us that original version of Next World. From something serious to something comedic, we have Chin Arabian Nights, translated as On Arabian Nights, but also sometimes as queer in the more classic meaning of the term. It actually stars frequent comic relief background Tezuka stars Tick and Tuck in very leading roles. It starts with the 2 of them working as hotel attendants, when a wealthy Arabian couple arrive and the pair take their luggage. Tuck finds a strange lamp among their possessions, and upon rubbing it, out pops the genie that grants unlimited wishes to the owner. Tuck initially tries to use it to help the poor mistreated hotel maid Cinderella, but after some events, the Arabian couple leaves, and Tick, Tuck, and Cinderella go on a journey to return the magic lamp. It gets more complicated though when the couple is revealed to be Princess Konkorum and her attendant, fiancée to the Prince of Baghdad, and the lamp is their royal proof, and a scheme is underway by the evil Fujira to control the prince. So with Autumn Arabian Nights, Tezuka returns to adapting classic fairy tales, this time mixing Cinderella with various stories from 1001 Arabian Nights. And it actually works pretty well. It's more Arabian Nights than Cinderella, but it's still neat to see this mix of stories but have it not feel forced. Tezuka really isn't half bad at adapting things. But there's another particular reference being made here. Frujira, the evil woman trying to control the prince, has a cat, and there's a mouse trying to help the heroes. This cat and mouse take up a good bit of screen time with their literal cat and mouse game, and in the end of volume interview for Autumn Arabian Nights, Tezuka describes how back in 1951, he didn't really consider copyright being a problem, and that this is very intentionally referencing Tom and Jerry. I don't know if it's supposed to be Tom and Jerry, but they were the inspiration. Add them to the list of copyrighted characters Tezuka inserted into his early works. In terms of its actual quality, Autumn Arabian Nights wasn't that bad. I don't think Tick and Tuck make the best protagonists, since they're a bit too comedy-focused to really work for any dramatic or action scenes, but it's a nice experiment to give them a shot as leads. With the right supporting cast, they can work. We actually continue with the literary adaptations, or at least inspirations, with Shinsekai Lulu, the New World of Lulu. We open on narration of a mysterious hole dug into the earth, which has strange properties. Following that, we're shown the young manga artist Rock having trouble getting published, and then a fancy party being held at his hotel. Attending the party are Duke Conchikusho, who's well known and wealthy, and the newcomer Earl Purin. Earl Purin puts on a presentation for the guests, unveiling something he dug up at his estate. A giant metal cylinder filled with objects from 20 years ago, a time capsule meant to be dug up in 1,000 years, or 980 at this point. But within the capsule was a note describing how someone named Mondesu was locked in there to their probable death, but there's no body to be found. Having entertained everyone with this mystery, Earl Purin takes his leave and runs into Rock, who gets inspired by his particular haircut, coming up with the design for Lulu. The Lulu manga not only gets him published, but becomes a major hit, maybe too much of one when Rock starts getting threats in the mail. He initially thinks it might be from Earl Purin for stealing his look, but that's not the case. During a visit to the Duke to clear up any misgivings, Rock's rival manga artist Bernard also comes by, the son of Duke Conchikusho, and the Earl personally gives him an idea for a story about a man being jealous of another and burying him alive to steal his fortune. A brand new take on The Count of Monte Cristo. Yeah, if you know the story, you may see where this is going, as the New World of Lulu is partially based on it. But only partially though, as Rock's story has its own twists and turns to take this manga to a strange place. The New World of Lulu was pretty good. It sets up a couple of interesting mysteries at the start, and keeps you guessing on where the story is going until the end. The mystery of the Iron Cylinder and Rock's death threats over Lulu act as two concurrent and intersecting stories in the beginning. The later half of the manga goes in some weirder places though, raising the stakes and putting in more action. I'd say I didn't like it as much as the slower, more dramatic intro, but it wasn't bad. I ended up liking the New World of Lulu, and apparently I wasn't the only one. A later element of this story involves a character learning to stop time, and this will become important in 10 years. Alright, it's April of 1951. I wonder if Tezuka's about to write anything good this month. It seems he's made something called Adam Taishi, Ambassador Adam? Some little story about spacefaring humans landing on an identical planet of doppelgangers that features a robot boy named Adam as one of the characters. Doesn't look like it was well received though. Maybe Tezuka will reuse this idea later. How about we return to the Wild West? It's time to look at Sableton-kun, or Young Cactus. The series follows a young boy named Sam, though due to his green pants made out of something, everyone calls him Cactus. While not the smartest, he's good-natured and willing to help or fight when he needs to, especially when he has his secret weapon, milk. Whenever Cactus is down on his luck, all he needs is some nutritious, delicious milk to give him superhuman abilities to save the day. If this sounds like it's reminiscent of Popeye and the way he gets super strength from eating nutritious spinach, well, I pointed out before in the 40s video that Tezuka clearly knew who Popeye was. According to interviews though, Tezuka says he came up with the idea on his own, but even if that's true, there may have been some unconscious inspiration here. He did say the design for Cactus was based on the comic Lil Abner though. The series follows Cactus as he gets roped into various situations, fights off bandits and ruffians, protects his school, and learns about his past. He's surely a goofy protagonist, but he's fun. He also has a love interest in Alice, who's another early example of Tezuka empowering his female characters, making them go from damsels to women of action. He seems to like doing this in his westerns in particular, and there's a point where Alice disguises herself as a man. But besides the character of Cactus, an interesting thing about him is his casting. Remember how Tezuka would treat his character designs as actors? Well, the role of Cactus was originally played by Rock, but he was recast with Sam after Chapter 1. I don't see any specific reason why he did this. I theorize that he just saw Rock as too serious of an actor, where Sam fit the role better, but it's still weird to see him just flat out recast the character. Various changes also happened through updated editions, with the version accessible to me being the 1980 re-release, with the expected updated art, reworked story, and, according to the Tezuka in English site, 14 of 37 chapters cut out or incorporated to others for a smoother experience. There were two major changes though, the first being that mid-series antagonist Heck Ben used to apparently be much more prominent throughout the story, and the second being a revelation that Cactus was the lost child of Mr. Cork, father of his love interest Alice. I guess they dropped that because they didn't think the incest added much. So while I can't really judge this based on how it was in 1951, I can see the 1980 version of the story is pretty fun. It's a very slapstick, comedy-focused series, and I think it holds up alright. There's this gag I like with the villain Allback, who's always shown so you never see his face. We also have a notable character and a rival for Cactus, Lemon Kid, whose series, another western, started between Cactus's first and second run, so Tezuka did a crossover of his works that shared a similar setting. There's another fun crossover-like bit that has to do with Cactus's 2 runs, but you'll need to wait for 53 for me to explain that. And speaking of characters, young Cactus gets the debut of 2 Tezuka stars, Sam, who plays Cactus, and Heck Ben, who plays Heck Ben. Come to think of it, since I'm introducing new stars, I should clarify something going forward. At this point, we've basically already seen all the important Tezuka stars. There will be designs Tezuka introduces and uses more than once going forward, but not much more like the level of a Hammock or a Duke Red. So if these segments disappear from future videos, that's basically why. Essentially, every Tezuka design gets reused somewhere, but in terms of major ones I'd make an effort to specifically point out, past this video, there probably won't be many. Overall, Young Cactus is a nice, easy to digest read. Nothing too complicated, just a good time and an occasional chuckle. Our next entry is only 2 pages. Miss Takarazuka is a story about a young woman auditioning for the Takarazuka Review. She misunderstands what the interviewers want, and hijinks ensue. Not a lot to say about this one. This almost went into the barely know anything about section. The shorts continue, but thankfully Ototsu Bokujo, Topsy-Turvy Ranch, gives us a bit more. It's 9 pages plus the cover, over 4 times as long. We're in the Wild West again, with a fox and a tanuki. They're looking for work and get hired by a local ranch. They competently do their jobs, along with some hijinks, but when the ranch's horses get stolen, the 2 of them find the bandits and save the day. Once again, not much to say. But it's about time we start a recurring element of the 50s, and that is returning to the 40s. Shinpen Getsukai Shinshi, or New Edition Moody Man, is the redone version of The Moody Man from 1948 that I was actually able to read. If you recall, The Moody Man was a sci-fi version of The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, aka The Tale of Princess Kaguya. A rocket falls to Earth, a child is found by an elderly couple who name her Sayoko, and she grows up beautiful and intelligent with numerous suitors, while scientists try to find out what's on the other side of the moon. That basic premise remains the same between the 2 works, but as expected, there's a couple of minor changes. A detective character that apparently used to be played by Bond is now played by Rock. The go-to detective role now just seems to be Rock's thing. Also, like in the original Kaguya story, Sayoko asks her suitor for impossible gifts in order to win her affections. In this version, one of them goes to Africa to find dinosaur eggs and kills Leo from Jungle Emperor. Or at least, a lion that looks a lot like him. Can you imagine being a kid when this came out, a fan of Tezuka's story about a white lion, and then you read this and see some guy just shoot him dead? Sometimes Tezuka's cameos can feel a bit mean. In terms of the story though, the manga's alright. For me, it only really got interesting near the end, when the expected sci-fi premise comes into play, but that is over pretty quick. It feels like this element of the story could have been expanded upon. Maybe if I had the original for comparison, I could point at this as a vast improvement, but without it, it's just a neat idea for a reimagining of a classic story that feels slightly wasted. Following one remake of a 40s series, we have another. The Mysterious Underground Man returns as Chikyu Tunnel, or the Earth Tunnel. I actually couldn't find much information on this. I have some images that seem to indicate there's some added or reworked scenes, but nothing in terms of clear plot points. It seems to be included in one of these expensive collections though, so it's not lost media, which is nice. Oh well, you can't have everything. Time for something a bit more interesting. Growing up, I never loved the Disney classic Bambi. Even now, I wouldn't consider it a favorite. But you know who did love it? Tezuka. Growing up, Tezuka was a big fan of Disney movies, specifically 1942's Bambi. He apparently really liked it, so it must have been pretty cool when in 1951 he got to work on an official adaptation after talks with Disney's Japanese rep. Yeah, Tezuka made an official Bambi manga. Over the years it looks like the nature of this license got a bit messy, but today it seems like Tezuka's Bambi is considered an official legal product. And if you've seen the Disney movie, it's very similar. If you haven't, Bambi's the story of the titular deer being born in the forest, making friends, and growing up. In both versions, they become friends with a rabbit named Thumper. They also make a second friend, but where in the movie it's with a skunk named Flower, in Tezuka's manga it's an otter named Buckteeth that also eats wood. Either Tezuka got confused on what a beaver is, or the translator messed up here. They do look more like an otter though. I don't know. We also have the old owl being played by a frog here, and the deer Bambi fights as a grown-up shows up earlier as a kid. Other than that, there's a change in how humans are portrayed. In the Disney movie, humans are basically dangerous monsters. In the manga, when he's a child, Bambi meets a kind one who gives him treats. In the winter, Bambi and Thumper sneak into a cabin to make a cake, ransacking the place, and this causes the hunters to follow them and do that part of the story, instead of just being hunters who happen to find Bambi and his mom in the woods. Humans are still a danger to the animals, but they're portrayed less as monsters here compared to the Disney movie. I'd say the Bambi manga is pretty decent. It's a very simple story, but it's done competently. I guess I could also say the manga conveys its story and characters better than the Disney movie, though that'd just be because the film has very little dialogue. I don't know if this manga would be that appealing to anyone who isn't already a Bambi fan, but if you are, this may be worth looking into. Really though, I just like the story of Tezuka loving the original movie when it came out, and that he got to make an official adaptation of it. It must have been a really cool experience for him. Now we have a fun little experiment with Kiseki To, Fossil Island. Originally, this was going to be a work called Zoku New Treasure Island, a continuation of the 1947 classic, though there was apparently no story connection to it. It would feature Rock on a treasure hunt, but when it was mostly done, Tezuka noticed some other magazine running a very similar story. So, he scrapped it to not be called a copycat, with only the title of Fossil Island remaining. The cover had already been finalized and sent out though, leaving Tezuka stuck with having to adapt it for something else, resulting in him making this collection of stories. We open up with 3 travelers on a boat, Rock as a reporter, Kodama a songwriter, and Tezuka himself as the real character instead of a background gag. The initial art is also way more realistic, a totally different style than we're used to. The 3 of them arrive at the titular Fossil Island, where there are many human-like rock formations, and then they all go to sleep for the night and the real show begins. The Fossil Island manga is actually a collection of stories connected by the themes of the human-like rocks, with each one being a dream of one of the characters. The first story, for instance, involves Rock discovering the rocks are parts of an art smuggling scheme committed by famous thief Arsène Lupin, being pursued by Sherlock Holmes. The dreams are also done in Tezuka's more traditional cartoony style to show the separate reality. The second story involves Tezuka being an anthropologist looking for the origin of humanity, and the third one involves Kodama being fairies. This one's pretty neat in the beginning, as Tezuka tries out this first-person format with Kodama's dialogue being side text. It's a shame he doesn't keep it going the whole time. Tezuka says this part was inspired by the 1947 film Lady in the Lake, which is a detective story shot entirely in first person. It's a neat watch for how experimental it was, and basically still is. It also stars Robert Montgomery, just like Here Comes Mr. Jordan, which I thought was a fun connection. But then we have the 5th story, which is especially of note. It involves Tezuka and Kodama fighting a merboy named Pippi. He was raised in the ocean by turtles, and Tezuka discovers he was originally human, and that his parents used him as an experiment to see if humanity could live under the sea. This wasn't a malicious mad scientist thing, though. Apparently this dream world has a super bad overpopulation problem. I'll hold on to why this is interesting for just a second, but as for Fossil Island overall, it's decent as a series of stories, but more so it's interesting. I wouldn't say any of the stories really grabbed me, but I like reading to see Tezuka mess around with art styles and point of view. It's a fun little experiment. But about that story with the mermaid, Tezuka just reused it. Like, exactly. Not just the same premise, but even some of the same panels. If I'm reading the interview right, a different magazine saw the story and just asked Tezuka to make it a full series. Introducing Pippi-chan, or Little Pippi, the 1951 manga based on the short story from Fossil Island. We return to the world we saw before. The planet is facing a massive overpopulation problem, and while solutions such as moving to Mars are considered, one scientist by the name of Dr. Lehman proposes we attach gills to ourselves and live in the sea. He gets laughed at for the suggestion, but believing it could save humanity, he and his wife agree to experiment on their infant child, turning a normal human baby into a merman. People catch wind of this and arrest him for it, but not before the parents set their child free. He's then found and raised by turtles, who name him Pippi. From here, the plot goes places. In an interview about the series, Tezuka admits to becoming incoherent, and I must agree. It starts off with Pippi and his turtle brother Gobbo having some adventures and saving a human girl who somehow gets abducted by fish and can breathe fine underwater, but then a ship killing their turtle mom causes them to go on land, get involved with an oceanic treasure hunter, and make friends with a talking car. I can't really praise the series for its writing. Its ending is also notably rushed and not fully conclusive. Pippi himself is a pretty vanilla protagonist without much interesting about him besides sometimes struggling with his human identity. That said, I actually liked his relationship with his brother Gobbo, the two of them constantly being a duo and having each other's back. It looks like Pippi is also supposed to be the third entry of the Animal trilogy, with its counterpart probably being Metropolis by process of elimination. I guess both feature experimental beings as protagonists, and the talking card and his fellows are robots. There's some similarities, but overall, I did really enjoy Little Pippi. It's fun to see Tezuka do a lot of scenes with aquatic life, something a bit different than the norm, but he throws in a lot of ideas, resulting in a bit of a mess. Even among his earlier works that likewise didn't have much in terms of plot or deep characters, I just really didn't care for this one. In terms of being a bit of a mess, Little Pippi has that in common with our next topic. Boken Kyodai, The Age of Adventure is, once again by Tezuka's own admission, not very well written. It has its problems, but also a decent bit of charm. And with that said expectations, in 1876, in the middle of the ocean, a ship is attacked by pirates. When the ship starts to sink, everyone abandons it, forcing 7 strangers onto a single lifeboat. These consist of Takanosuke Arashi, a child retainer of the Japanese shogun on his way to deliver a message to the American president, Prince Carolinard and Princess Maria of Hungary, Peter Lorre, a French professional gambler, Luigi Bompa, one of the pirates who was attacking the ship, a little dog who's more intelligent than they seem, and finally an old English priest named Picard, who begins to pass as the days go by, stranded in the water. Before the old man dies, he tells the tale of how Captain Kidd once visited his church and gave him half a map to the treasure of Napoleon, showing it to everyone on the boat. The remaining 6 then get separated when a waterspout sends them up in the air, and while they all have their own priorities, word about the treasure of Napoleon gets out. We'll follow Takanosuke as he gets roped into the hunt for the treasure, as no one knows who has the half of the map the old man had, and the remaining half comes into play. Also, while all this is happening, an Arab man from the ship is causing a fuss on another lifeboat, as his precious dog is missing and something special about it. And now I have to ask you, does any of this sound familiar so far? Age of Adventure is the reimagined Old Man's Treasure Island, all the way back from 1945. Tezuka was apparently busy writing Jungle Emperor and reworking that Ambassador Adams story with the robot boy, so he reused the idea to make things easier for himself. It's not a simple remake though, as there's a bunch of important changes. For starters, we have an actual clear main character this time around in Takanosuke. We also have a bunch of different nationalities. Age of Adventure is actually a bit of a globetrot, but aside from that, a lot remains the same. Hamake is once again the main villain, who learns about the treasure and goes after it. Princess Maria takes on the role of Hoshiko and meets a mysterious man in a bat costume, and there's once again a mysteriously smart dog. It's all very similar, but also very different. It was a decent idea to redo an old story like this. Now, according to Tezuka, the publisher extended Age of Adventure beyond what it was supposed to be. He had the initial plot, but then he had to figure out a way to extend it. This is the reason he gives for some plot points being a little slapped together. His original idea looks like it was going to be a Wild West adventure focused on America, but it only starts that way. A lot happens in this story, to say the least. Takanosuke will go from American farmhand to enlisting in the French Foreign Legion in Morocco. The princess will essentially be abducted by the Batman, posing as her brother, and the reason behind the dog is, well, I understand why Tezuka says this wasn't the best written. Unfortunately, not all of these plot points and characters feel intentionally planned out, but rather like we just eventually get to an ending while trying to wrap everything up as best we can. Takanosuke's mission to deliver a message to the American president? Sounds interesting, but we don't really get to see it. I still think the manga is kind of fun though. I like Takanosuke as a protagonist, having a deep sense of honor and duty, while also struggling to resist the treacherous pull. He's also not afraid to fight, giving us some fun action every now and then. This may not be the best example of Tezuka's writing, but I think it's a good show of how out of the box he could be, for better or for worse. It truly is an adventure to read, and while sometimes messy, it's not boring. For some fun bits of trivia, Tezuka also put in a ton of movie references in this manga, so if you get the chance to read it, see how many you can find. He also claims that Takanosuke's name was actually a mistake. It was originally supposed to be Kazenosuke, but a typo forced his hand into changing it. The next few entries are all pretty small, but we start with the return of the Fox and Tanuki duo. Topsy-Turvy Ranch continues in the form of Ototsu Kenshi, Topsy-Turvy Swordsman. The Fox and Tanuki were out fishing one day when they reeled in a chest containing an ousted princess. She asks for their help to return her to the throne, and while they don't make for great sword fighters, they just might manage to do the job. Just like Topsy-Turvy Ranch, this was a short but simple story that's nothing too great but an alright quick read. Obake Jungle, or Ghost Jungle, is a 4-page story about animals trying to scare hunters away by dressing up as ghosts. This one had a fun concept, and I like this giraffe that makes itself look like a weird elephant. Maternal Kozo, Skyscraper Kid, follows a young boy who lives at the top of the Empire State Building, on the 840th floor. This is quite impressive considering it only has 102. His best friend is a mouse, and when someone tries to buy the rights of the building away, he gets involved in a plot where the building's foundation stones hold a secret valuable mineral. I actually like the idea of an important building under threat because its foundation secretly contains something like $1 trillion of diamonds, but it doesn't work here at all. This foundation block is apparently so fragile that a mouse can dig through it and grab the mineral very easily, so there's no point to this complicated plot. I need ideas, Skyscraper Kid, but you just missed the mark. Horo Basha-kun, Covered Wagon Kid, is a western featuring a wandering caravan. Among its members are the brash Tony, the more gentle Jeannie, and their shared love interest Margaret. While Margaret sees the flaws in both the boys, when bandits attack to steal their gold, as well as a group of natives, the two develop and... Hey, come to think of it, this is a lot like Bad Basco. Yeah, they say Pistol Angel was inspired by that movie, but this has way more similarities. At any rate, this was a bit of a victim of its length. At 7 pages, Tony and Ginny don't have a lot of time to show their development, and the ending feels pretty abrupt. Overall, not great, maybe inspired by Bad Bascom. Next is Wan Kosuki Eiku, Wan Goes to the Moon. Another little 4-page story, Earth scientists are making an expedition to the moon and decide to bring their dog as their mascot. They make it to the moon, but something goes wrong, and they need to lose some weight to return to Earth. They abandon the dog, with no hesitation at all, they even have smiles on their faces, and then when the dog is found by aliens, he turns them against the humans. The moral of this story? Don't mistreat dogs. Here's an odd one, as Kiseki Ningen, Fossil People, opens on Dr. Hanamaru in the Arctic, coming across the frozen mammoth. He somehow rigs the ship to shoot lightning, defrost and revive it, and in the process, he also revives the caveman hidden underneath. He takes them back home, they have a great time exploring the modern world, and then the caveman kidnaps Riko at night with Kenichi and Hammock pursuing, and... Hey, wait a minute. This is the world in 1,000 years. It's a remake. It's not one-to-one, but the plots are almost exactly the same, except they don't go to the future, and we focus more on the caveman. I guess I like it a bit more, since I thought the world in 1,000 years tried to do too much, and this manga scales it back. It's just weird to see what you think is a new story just become one you already know. Maybe it's because in February of 1952, Tezuka was busy working on an adaptation of Journey to the West titled Boku no Son Goku, or My Son Goku. Tezuka had been a big fan of the classic Chinese story since seeing the old 1941 animated film Princess Iron Fan. My Son Goku isn't quite Tezuka adapting Journey to the West though, but rather him making his own version of it. That might be why it's his Son Goku. It follows the monkey Son Goku as he gains power, causes trouble in heaven, is punished by the Buddha, and is sent on a quest to escort the monk Sanso to India to recover sacred scriptures. The base premise is, as you may or may not know, but Tezuka makes this version of the story his own in numerous ways. How? Well, you'll have to see later in the separate video all about it. And speaking of, it's now April of 1952, a year since that Ambassador Adam story came out. It turns out Tezuka reworked it into a little series you may have heard of called Tetsuwan Adam, aka Mighty Adam, and it's going to be very successful and influential. Yeah, Mighty Adam is also getting its own video because, of course it is, it's Tezuka's most iconic franchise. Its video is going to be a bit longer than the others. Mighty Adam really feels like it was being built up to though. Where Metropolis was the combination of Tezuka's various robot-centric series before it, Mighty Adam feels like a successor to those ideas. Their combination. It follows a robot boy named Adam in a world where humans and robots live side by side. Built to replace the dead son of the great scientist Dr. Tenma, he's abandoned by his father, essentially adopted by Dr. Ochanomizu, and put on the path of heroism. Many chapters feature Adam fighting crime or some other evil sci-fi invention or scientist, but there's a lot of moments that tackle human-robot relations, prejudice, and the human condition. And my favorite little detail that must have been intentional is this. While Adam was artificially created, he gets a robot mom and dad so he can have a family. This was reportedly done to humanize the character and make him more relatable. And you know who's supposed to be the actress that plays his mom? It's Michi. Or at least, I think it's her. The internet says it's her, but I don't see an exact quote, and Michi's design is more fluid than the other stars, but I think it's supposed to be her. The Tezuka star that symbolized his early robot stories is now the literal parent figure to Adam. Isn't that cool? It's too thematic to be a coincidence. It's just perfect casting on a meta level. But needless to say, there's so much to talk about when it comes to Mighty Adam. Look forward to its dedicated video. For now, just know that this was a really big hit, and the initial run of Mighty Adam would go on for about 16 years. I don't know the exact point in time we can say this is when Tezuka became popular, but at the very least, he was by now. Let's move on to something easier. Manga Kyoshitsu, or Manga Classroom, is a sequel of sorts to Manga University, where Tezuka gives more lessons about making manga. I wasn't able to read this one, which is a bit of a shame. While I didn't care much for the stories in Manga University, I found it interesting to see what lessons Tezuka taught about making manga in the 50s, and I would have liked to see more. But apart from that pit stop, we move from the famous Robot Boy to the famous Wooden Boy, as Tezuka sort of does another Disney property. Disney's Pinocchio came out in 1940, but apparently only came to Japan in 1952. Tezuka must have really liked the film, because he decided to make a manga, well, not an adaptation like Bambi was, but his own version of Pinocchio that takes certain inspirations from the Disney movie. Now you might be thinking, well, Pinocchio is a popular story, maybe he just made his own version independently, like all his other fairy tale adaptations. But then you look at the art and character designs, and yeah, there was some Disney influence here. He isn't just copying the movie though, there's some scenes Tezuka added from the original Pinocchio story too. All the better, as the original Disney version is pretty short, so a couple of added scenes help. Still, this apparently caused some legal trouble for Tezuka, though I'm not too sure on the specifics. But as a manga, Tezuka's Pinocchio is good. It's charming and worth looking into if you're a die-hard Pinocchio fan. Kaseki Ninga no Gyakushu, Revenge of the Fossil People, gives us the return of our caveman friend, as well as Dr. Hanamaru, Kenichi, and Riko. After the events of Fossil People, the caveman apparently made his home in modern day. The Prime Minister gets curious about him, and after testing his strengths to entertain a party, puts him in charge of the local zoo since he can talk to animals. This initially works out, but then the Prime Minister gets the idea of having the best zoo in the world. Importing more and more rare animals and cutting down on food costs, problems arise. The premise is a little strange, especially when international espionage gets involved in the zoo, but it was a fun enough read. Kase Karakita Otoko, the man from Mars, opens with Bond and two children walking through a blizzard. He leaves them in a sheltered area while he searches for a place to warm up and winds up getting shot by a lamp. Luckily, a man in black passes by, bringing him to a cabin filled with other people. Bond is saved, but the Man in Black's odd behavior gets the cabin goers talking. Through various characters' flashbacks, it's revealed the man is, in fact, a Martian. Given the title, it's not really surprising to the reader. He's come to Earth because there's a lack of water on his planet and he hopes to borrow some, but the Earth's bureaucracy complicates the process. This was a solid read. The premise of an alien coming to Earth and being annoyed at politics is very on point. The attentive of you may recall a 1947 manga, also called Kase Karakito Otoko, The Man from Mars. Before, I only had some images, but I've since found a plot summary. So, in light of these two works sharing the same name, let's compare. It looks like the 47 manga is about a scientist named Mikiko investigating the fourth dimension. She meets a man named Omega who can only be seen wearing some special glasses, gets sucked into the fourth dimension, and learns of a conspiracy involving shifting the Earth's tectonic plates. Omega turns out to be from Mars. Shocking, I know. He causes some earthquakes or something, and then, according to the plot synopsis I found, decides conquering Earth is too difficult and leaves. I think more stories should involve aliens trying to take over the Earth and then just decide it's too annoying. You'd think The Man from Mars would have more similarities with The Man from Mars, but to make things more confusing, in the volume interview for Monster the 30th Parallel, Tezuka says this story was a retooling of Romance Island. I'm not really sure what the similarities between these two works would be, but that's what he's claiming. But let's get ready for our next topic. It's time for a real gem in early Tezuka. Rock Bokenki, The Adventures of Rock, is one of the standout works of the 50s, at least in my opinion. In the world of this manga, in the 1900s, an astrological discovery was made. Opposite the Earth, orbiting the Sun, is another planetoid, perfectly in sync so as to never be seen from the Earth, until it started to slow down. And it kept slowing down, until eventually it started to get close. The approach of another planet caused massive storms across the world, destroying cities and scattering civilians and families. We follow Rock, son of the late Dr. Damon, the man who discovered the planet and named it after himself. When his father dies, Rock becomes the legal owner of the planet, because that's how that works. And with his friend Daisuke, they set off to explore the new world. They arrive to a barren land with no life in sight, and the crew suddenly starts suffering a strange ailment. They decided to leave Rock and Daisuke stranded on planet Damon, and the two of them will discover it isn't so lifeless after all. Strange creatures inhabit the land, as well as two different societies, the clay people, called the Rubarum, and the bird people, the Apumu. While hostile at first, Rock will learn to befriend the Apumu, teach them science, and make a second home for himself. But all's not quiet on Earth, as their telescopes discover something about planet Damon. It's not just rich in resources, but its oceans are oil, and come with a valuable race of bird people to enslave. The Adventures of Rock is a tad more serious and darker than what came before. Paired with its writing, it feels a lot more epic in scope. There's large conflicts with societies on the line, changing motivations as the Earth and planet Damon come into contact. Rock, for his part, is a good protagonist. He starts off more bright-eyed about exploring the new planet, and gradually matures as the plot gets more serious. Daisuke is a bit more of a comedic element, but he also develops as the story goes on. Tezuka actually based The Adventures of Rock off of the 1936 Czech novel War with the Newts by Karel Čapek. That story was more of a parody it seems, but Tezuka went and gave it a grimmer tone. And then he gave it another dose when it was republished. The Adventures of Rock is looked at fondly now, but reportedly, it wasn't popular when it initially came out, leading to an early cancellation. Tezuka would republish it, and ended up changing its ending for something darker. Maybe it was too ahead of its time. I do have some complaints, though in all fairness, they might be because of the series' early cancellation, but there's actually a bit of a plot hole in the story that's too obvious to ignore. Remember how there's the clay people, the Rubarum, and the bird people, the Apumu? Well, the clay people just stopped showing up. They stopped being a part of the story, even when it feels like they really should be. The story is still interesting without them, but once I noticed it, it really stood out. They're just gone. Maybe they were intended to return later, but as it stands, the story is all about the Birdmen. Well, I guess nothing's perfect. Even with its flaws, The Adventures of Rock is without a doubt one of Tezuka's best early works. It also gives us a sneak peek at a soon-to-be iconic Tezuka star. Right here, as a background character, is the actress Sapphire making her first appearance in this video. Although, to be clear, this is her debut work. The run for Adventures of Rock just overlaps with her debut in Princess Knight. Perhaps the most iconic female Tezuka star, she's reportedly based on Takarazuka review performer Shikage Awashima. She'll be much more recognizable when she gets her own series, though. Toning down the seriousness, but keeping the duo of Rock and Daisuke, we have the short Kazujima Shoden, Volcano Island Boy. A group of documentarists are trying to make a film about a volcanic island with 7 mysteries. They say the sun rises twice, there are strange voices to be heard, and more. They then see the boys outside and decide to hire them for a potentially dangerous journey. They all go to the island, discover the truth behind the mysteries, and in the end, a film gets made. I didn't find myself really engaged with this one. Its short length means the mysteries didn't get time to breathe, and we just go through them rapid fire. The characters are pretty one note too. Reading this right after the Adventures of Rock probably didn't help. Pistol o Atama ni Nosetsu Hitobito, or people with pistols on their heads, sounds like a weird concept, but it's actually a joke about Japanese top knots coined by the writings of one Ivan A. Goncharov. It takes place in 1824, when Japan had a pretty strict no outsiders policy. Then, a ship from the country of Romaria arrives. This causes a panic, as the local politicians try to negotiate with the Romarians, while also trying to get orders from their higher-ups on what to do. Some groups are preparing to fight, some are aiming to sneak in a profit, and then there's a little boy Kurisuke, working as a merchant's apprentice, but with a genius mind. While I was initially disappointed that the story did not in fact feature people with guns for heads, this wasn't that bad. A foreign ship causing the people to panic and not know what to do has some historical basis and good potential for drama. I wasn't too interested in Kurisuke and his plot of inventing stuff, but we get some fun fight scenes where Tezuka messes around with the panels. So, even if the plot isn't that remarkable, I'll give this series points for that. Tezuka will recycle this genius boy idea in Super Taiheki. Also, well, not really important, people with pistols on their heads was itself recycled from an unused short story intended for Manga University. Onto a work I wasn't able to read, there's Awate Mi Mi-chan, Little Mimi the Hasty. This was a picture book about a little rabbit named Mimi who jumps to conclusions. She sees things like 2 bear cubs playing, thinks they're fighting, and panics, causing all the other animals problems when she gives them misinformation. The moral of the story was to take a step back and assess situations, instead of being hasty and jumping to false conclusions. Following it is a series I mostly wasn't able to read, with Dai Shizen Tokuso, Nature and Fantasy. I'm not too clear on this, but it's apparently 3 stories according to the official Tezuka site that use metaphors to explain the origins of the earth, animals, and people. I only seem to have one of them, which is found in one of Tezuka's talk collections, and it's about explaining how people are formed in the womb. I'm not sure where the other parts of this manga are, but at least I have some of it to show. And we have a last minute addition as I edit this video, with Okasan no Ashi, Mother's Leg. I overlooked this because I mistook it for its 1957 remake, but there was a version of the story at the end of 1952. It's about a mother cat having kids in Africa, the extra weight meaning they can't fly out, so the mother then sacrifices her leg not to abandon one of her kids because somehow the weight of a cat's leg was the threshold for them to fly. A bit silly if you ask me. Maybe next video I can get through editing it without finding a mistake or something that I left out. But now it's 1953, and Tezuka's about to do something big. Maybe. Manga was starting to take off, but it was mostly aimed at boys. There were manga aimed at girls, and they had existed for quite a while, but apparently there wasn't anything with a deep narrative or characters. Apparently, shoujo manga at the time was basically all just comedy or slice of life stuff, nothing like Next World of the Adventures of Rock, but for girls. Now the claim goes, Tezuka made the first shoujo story manga, a manga aimed at girls with an actual narrative and story. Not a simple comedy series or fairy tale adventure, a plot-focused shoujo series with developing characters. Now maybe this is false, and there could have been one before. Tezuka's attributed with this, but it's possible some obscure manga predates it. I don't have every shoujo manga ever made in front of me to validate this claim, and besides that, the definition of story manga is already not the most clear if you'll recall from my last video. but at the very least, Tezuka's about to popularize story shoujo manga. And it's time to cash in all those times I pointed out Tezuka having strong female characters that disguise themselves as men, and his love for the Takarazuka Review, as he releases Ribbon no Kishi, Princess Knight. The story of Sapphire, a princess born with a male and female heart, as she must pretend to be a man to protect the throne, while wishing she could live as a girl. Add on an angel sent from heaven to take back her accidental male heart, the noble schemes to reveal her true gender and install a new heir, and an evil sorcerer, and you've got a series. Easily one of Tezuka's most recognizable manga, Princess Knight was very influential. Even if it wasn't the origin of story shoujo manga or a lot of tropes it uses, the fact that we attribute them to it should indicate how successful it was. It's very iconic. The manga leverages a lot of Tezuka's love for fairy tales and his trend of more proactive female characters. Dare I say, Princess Knight to me comes across as very feminist, and I suspect that may have been part of its appeal. It's also interesting to look at today with how it plays around with gender roles, but let's not start that discussion in this video. Needless to say, Princess Knight will be getting a video all to itself, alongside a very brief lesson on the origins of shoujo manga. And don't worry, there'll only be one more series in this video that I'll be saving for another time. Told you this was an important era for Tezuka. Well, there goes Tezuka's love for the Takarazuka Review, off to do great things. Now let's look at one of his other favorite things to put in his manga, the threat of nuclear war. Taiheyo X-Point, or X-Point in the Pacific, is the story of scientists making a new kind of bomb, the air bomb. Fear has driven mankind to create weapons beyond the scope of use, and panic engulfs the world, as it said the moment they test this new bomb, a chain reaction will destroy all the planet's air. An ex-crook named Sam decides to return to a life of crime to stop the test, but when things go wrong, he and his son must journey to the X-Point in the Pacific to stop the bomb and save the world. A bit of a goofier read than you'd think given the premise, X-Point still has some dark undertones, likely informed by Tezuka's experiences with the war. The panic of the air bomb is well done, characters being scared but not knowing what to do, officials trying to convince them it's fine and that it's needed to fight the enemy. There's parts that feel a bit unnecessary to the story. Sam's coronal past doesn't actually feel that important, but I like his inner conflict and decision that nothing else matters, he's gonna stop that test or die trying. If there's a chance it may destroy the world and kill his family, he has no reason not to give it his all. Not a manga I'd overly recommend, but I'll give credit where it's due. If there's something Tezuka would know firsthand and could write well, it's fear of a bomb wiping everything out. Yamagoya no Akari, Mountain Hut Lights, is another could not read manga. It's supposedly about two boys in a cabin during a snowstorm. 6 adults arrive and start burning extra firewood they need to keep themselves warm, then there's skis, and then, I don't know. It looks like there might be some darker implication, but the moral is apparently about children not letting adults boss them around and wreck everything. Doranjo Monogatari, or The Tale of Castle Drown, has a whole 5 pages for us to look at. It starts in the medieval age, when a prince asks a cowardly knight to guard a treasure box. The cowardly knight cowers, dies alongside the prince, and the prince denies him entry into heaven. The knight decides to have fun haunting the place, until a poor child arrives and the ghost helps him make a living, earning his way into the afterlife for his good deeds. A simple story, but I actually like the premise. I would have liked a longer version of this. 13 no Himitsu, 13 Secrets, is a little bit longer, and once again gives us the duo of Rock and Daisuke. In a vague, distant land, the local prince is shot during a public speech. They find the gun, and even manage to trace it back to its owner, but he has a perfect alibi, as everyone knows what time the shooting took place thanks to the local clock tower, and he was home at that time. In comes Rock and Daisuke to stumble upon the mystery and solve the case. An 8-page mystery, it's paced pretty well. Not bad at all. Another 8 pages gives us Utai Penio, or Sing Penny. It stars 2 farm girls, Penny and Peggy, the former of which wishes to become a famous singer. A letter in the mail makes it look like her dream will come true, and though there was a slight misunderstanding, she makes it work. Penny becomes a singer in the city, but upon returning home to Peggy and her family, she realizes how unhappy she is. The moral of the story is that happiness comes in all forms, even if not glamorous. But it's time to kick it up a notch, as Murano Odoriko, the village dancer, doesn't just have 8 pages, it has 9. In a small country village, the teacher gets concerned when the student's house life gets troublesome. Some people showed up one day and proclaimed his house as their divine temple. A dancing cult formed, and even the boy's parents got sucked up in it. When the teacher discovers that the house is about to fall apart from all the dancing, he tries to warn the cult members, but they don't listen, and eventually learn from their mistake. What a weird little story. Imagine just walking into school one day and hearing so-and-so's house has been taken over by a dancing cult. Next, we return to the 40s with Sanju Hachido Senjo no Kaibutsu, Monster of the 38th Parallel, a remake of 1948's Tuberculosis. The story starts with a boy growing sick, tuberculosis as you might assume. He has some bizarre dreams and all of a sudden, he's better. A miracle of a recovery. Then Bon and Kenichi appear out of nowhere and say, "Hey, we've got one heck of a story for you." A strange mold shrunk them down to microscopic size, and they ended up in the body of the sick boy. Inside there, they met the tuberculosis virus, befriended a female virus named Mode, and got in the middle of a conflict with them and the white blood cells. As I wasn't able to read the original Tuberculosis, I can't comment on adaptational changes. As far as I can tell, all of the premise remains very similar. What is a bit interesting is how Tezuka humanizes the disease. It would be easy to paint the tuberculosis guys as evil, and certainly some of them are, but the argument is also made that they're living things too, just doing what they naturally do to spread and survive. It's more of a nuanced take. We don't get a lot of time to explore the concept, but I like the idea. The manga itself is otherwise pretty standard, but I didn't expect ex-Dr. Tezuka to take a sympathetic stance to disease. Maybe it's his love of all things nature? It's time for another literary adaptation with Kaiketsu Cyrano the Magnificent, based on the historical figure turned play Cyrano de Bergerac. Now, I know next to nothing about this particular person and work, but luckily it looks like Tezuka mainly went off the play, so that saves me some trouble. Cyrano the Magnificent adapts the play by Edmond Rostand, a fictionalized account loosely following Cyrano's life. Taking place in 1640s France, Cyrano is a well-respected cadet in the French army. He also, in the play and historically, has a very large nose, so of course he's played by Duke Red. Cyrano is in love with Roxanne, but a complex about his nose leaves him with little room to confess. Then a new member of the army, Christian, also grows affections towards her, and a sort of love triangle forms, with Cyrano helping Christian win Roxanne's affections at his own expense. That plot synopsis remains true for both the original play and Tezuka's adaptation, but there's one little problem. In Tezuka's version, that's not the initial premise, it's the whole story. Tezuka didn't finish writing this. It looks like he may have intended to take a break and return, but as far as I can tell, he didn't. Of the 5-act story, we only have up to most of the third. Makes it a little hard to judge when the story has no climax. It's a pretty slapstick manga, and I like Duke Red as Cyrano, both in character and design, but the most fun part might actually be this weird little bit regarding the actor of Christian, Sam. Remember back to Young Cactus when I said there's another crossover-like thing? Well, the last panels of Cyrano have Sam saying the manga is taking a break and switching his outfit to Cactus, announcing that series' return. So, in a weird way, Cyrano the Magnificent is tied to Young Cactus. I don't know how you'd describe it, but it is. Next, we have something a bit different, which will be seen every now and then going forward. Gina Shonen Galaxy Boy is a picture story Tezuka wrote, a style more like a novel with illustrations, with bodies of text accompanied by images. Or at least, it started as one. Here's how Galaxy Boy looks at the beginning, here's some at the middle, and here's how it looks by the end. Yeah, Tezuka just changed art styles as he made this. Weird, isn't it? I don't see a reason for it, but I'd be curious to know why. I actually think this picture story format can look really nice at times. I prefer when Tezuka divides the panels from the text instead of putting them together, but I'll put the art style on the shelf for a minute and talk about the story. In a rare case, Galaxy Boy actually takes place in Canada. We can now rest happy knowing we've been acknowledged. In the icy north, a wolf pack hunts the traffic coming in and out of a small town, but one day the traffic stops coming. The wolves investigate the town and it's been completely abandoned. They get into arguments over leadership, food now being a major concern with the humans gone, and one of the females gives birth to a young pup named Boo. The leader of the pack eventually tries to eat Boo, but he's saved by a Japanese boy named Kenji, fleeing southward. The reason the town was abandoned is because a massive glacier is making its way south, causing everyone to abandon the north or freeze to death. Kenji continues along, saying farewell to the young wolf, and in a desperate attempt to stop the glacier, the government drops a new kind of bomb to melt it. It proves ineffective, but had the unintended result of imbuing the nearby Boo with strange powers, causing him to glow gold. Kenji finds himself in the services of a wealthy family, and as he deals with his new environment and holding on to his Japanese pride, we'll follow him and Boo on their separate adventures. In terms of its story, Galaxy Boy is pretty decent until the last third, I'd say, where it goes to a weird place, but until then, it's much more of a character piece, focusing on Kenji. He finds himself bullied and abused on all sides, trying his best to uphold the ideals his dad taught him. It's got a touch of maturity to it, and I use the phrase touch of maturity for a reason. As we all know, this video series is chronologically going through the works of Osamu Tezuka, the gradual evolution of his career. By now we know how it started, but if you know how his career ends, you'll know he eventually got into more mature adult content, manga aimed at adults, Gekiga. Now I'll say right now, I don't think Galaxy Boy is Gekiga. Gekiga may not have a definitive defining line between art style, target audience, and the actual story content, but at the very least I don't think Galaxy Boy fits. But here, in select moments, we can see hints. Not the cartoony style he'd usually use and would use in parts of Galaxy Boy, but these detailed illustrations. We saw these before in Fossil Island, but that was to divide reality from dreams. Here, just for a moment, Tezuka gives his story a more mature art style. Here, I think we see a spark of Gekiga. Galaxy Boy is an odd one in its inconsistencies, and maybe not the best narrative by its end, but to me, it does feel like we can see Tezuka play around with a more mature style, and that makes the series notable to me. Let's go to something easier for a minute, another 8-page work. Mahaboroshi no Enbon, the mysterious flying saucer, starts with a proclamation that the Earth is under attack. Militaries unite, the army scrambles to test the new planes and machines, and young Detective Rock finds it all a bit suspect. The enemy does appear, but only briefly, and then they vanish. He doesn't understand what's actually happening, so he visits the scientist who discovered the invaders. While initially evasive, the scientist confesses, there are no invaders, it's all him. He created fake Martians to unite the world under a common threat, and flies fake UFOs to continue the ruse. While Tezuka's short manga like these usually don't amount to much, I thought the twist here was good, though I've definitely seen it a few times. But since this was made in '53, I'll give it the credit. Oh hey, it's finally time to talk about Lemon Kid from his guest appearance in Young Cactus. Back to the Wild West we go. In the days after the Civil War ended, a man walks into town, the notorious outlaw, Melon Kid. He has some unfinished business with a particular man, but as he walks over to settle that business, he runs into an old associate, Lemon Kid, the local sheriff. Lemon warns him to leave town, but Melon refuses, and as Lemon's love Penny asks him if he knows the infamous outlaw, we flash back to Lemon's childhood, and how he met his hero Melon, who trained him to become an outlaw himself. Where Young Cactus was a comedic adventure, this is a drama. While there are lighthearted scenes with the younger Lemon, the tone is generally more serious. It's pretty interesting having this as a companion to Young Cactus, seeing similar scenes and just how different they can feel. There's not too much here I could say without giving away the full plot. It's not the longest or most complex story, but I found the characters and interactions between Melon and Lemon to be well written, all summed up with a satisfying ending. A good read overall. Uchu Kyoso Kyoku, Space Rhapsody, has an attention-grabbing title, though maybe the contents are a tad disappointing. This is actually a partially historical manga centered around the famous astronomer Galileo. He has a crackpot theory that the Earth revolves around the Sun, and the Church doesn't like it. While being hunted, he ties his findings to his pet goat to be delivered to a publisher, and we mainly follow the goat's adventure. I've not seen any real-life basis for this goat delivery, and I assume it's made up, but if there's any Galileo experts watching, feel free to correct me. The weird part is that that's only the first half. What's the second part of the story? Is it another thing to do with Galileo? Well, far off in the year of 1990X, mankind has landed on Mars, Specifically, the Japanese are the first to do it. They're even broadcasting this momentous occasion, but their signal gets interrupted by the Catalonians, who seem to have been second but claim to be the real first to land. The two groups proceed to fight over the land dispute of who owns Mars. And no, this doesn't somehow connect back to Galileo, they're just two stories that have something to do with space. No idea what's up with this format, but each story taken individually, they're fine. It's a little weird to think of a country owning Mars if they're the first to land on it, but this was written in the 50s, and Tezuka seemed to think we'd be doing this years ago by now, so I'll give him a break. Next up is... oh boy, it's this one. Next up is Mame Daitorio, translated as President Bean or the Little President. This is Tom, and he's a slave in the American Confederate South. Now you might be looking at the art and noticing Tom has a different skin tone compared to his fellow black slaves, but apparently he's just so light-skinned he can pass for a white person. That's what they say. Anyways, if that premise seems unlikely, don't worry. It's revealed in the end that Tom's actually just white, and people assumed he was part black because his adopted mom is. For some reason his adopted mother is also drawn in differently. Whatever you're thinking, let's just roll with it for now. Tom is a good kid, and he doesn't like slavery much. He especially doesn't like it when his mother is sold off by plantation owner Hamburg. So Tom runs away, and when all hope seems lost, he runs into Lemon Kid. Yeah, this is another entry into the expanded Young Cactus Lemon Kid universe. That makes 4 if you want to include Cyrano. Lemon needs to ditch his clothes, and Tom needs a new look. So, they switch, and Tom starts his journey with the goal of abolishing slavery. So, weird premise aside, I actually liked this one. Tom's a good protagonist with a real sense of drive for his cause. He's tough in a fight, but also vulnerable as a runaway slave with Hamburg hunting him and the law in his favor. There's some close calls and a good sense of drama, and opposite of what you'd expect from someone who uses so much racist designs for his black characters, Tezuka addresses the themes of racism decently well in my opinion. There's a firm racism is stupid stance, which gets highlighted when people turn on Tom after realizing he's black. If anything, all of Tom's problems being magically solved when it's revealed he's white is a little on the nose modern. In my opinion, this aged like fine wine. I know the entire premise is a little odd, but with a good balance of action and character moments, this is actually one of Tezuka's better westerns at this time. Next, we have another adaptation, with Crime and Punishment, Tezuka's take on the classic novel by Fyodor Dostoevsky. The 1860s were a difficult time for Russia, and it's in this era we follow Raskolnikov, a young student living in St. Petersburg. He's quite poor and has dropped out of school while not taking up any work. He gets by pawing off trinkets to an old lady, but out of desperation for more money and hatred for her greed, he kills her. Luckily for him, he manages to get away with it, and even have others implicated for his crime. But even so, his own paranoia and guilt won't leave him, and his life will get more complicated when his sister gets engaged and he gets involved with the local prostitute. That's the basic premise any literary site would give you about the original novel, and this manga stays true to it. But the original novel is pretty girthy, and this manga is only a single volume. Tezuka had to simplify or remove many plot points to get this to work and be more approachable to a general audience. Now, I'm sure there's Russian literature experts that would call this manga a butchering of Dostoevsky's work, but in terms of an all-ages version of Crime and Punishment, I think this does the job. It has most of the key plot points and characters, though it actually gives us a slightly different ending that's interesting in its own way. What we don't get from the novel are the lengthy inner monologues of our main character, we don't get many scenes revolving around Raskolnikov being respected of the murder, and many of the less important subplots get cut. Tezuka also adds in a bit more comedy, which does feel a little awkwardly put in. I get him wanting to add some levity for his child audience, but it can be a bit jarring given the subject matter. I think this is one of his best examples of repeating panels though. When Raskolnikov commits the murder, Tezuka frames several pages with the layout of the building so we can see where several characters are and how Raskolnikov manages to not be seen when the crime happens. It's just a really good use of the technique, though it also meant we did get to see the actual murder. A big scene not to show. While this manga is a vast oversimplification of Dostoevsky's work, as someone with a casual understanding of Crime and Punishment, it's fine. By no means does it work as a substitute for the novel, but I think it's a decent version to show kids. Now, would I say this has much to offer for older audiences or fans of the original? Not really, but by itself, in a vacuum, perfectly fine. We're getting pretty close to the end as we enter 1954, but before that, it's time for the beloved section, stuff I could only find mention of or otherwise very little about. This is where I mention things I only have just a listing of, a single picture, or just very little to say. Ground rules are pretty easy. If I can find proof of it, it gets put in. If I can't verify its existence, it doesn't. You could say it's less comprehensive, but I'd rather be relatively sure that my videos are accurate instead of putting in potential mistakes. Also, sometimes there's listings for random interviews Tezuka did, untitled comics, which are great to try and look up, or a collection of doodles he sometimes literally names My Doodles. These will generally be skipped since tracking them down is tricky. From 1950, we have Tommy-chan Kyodai, or Tommy-chan Siblings, which is available in a collection, though info is sparse. There's Hado Decay Chicken, the Cuckoo Clock Incident, which looks like another story with Rock as a detective, and then there's something from the Takuruzuka Reviews magazine listed as Shijo Ai Dokusha Taikai Kyakuhan, or script from the magazine's reader contest. I can only assume this is some script submitted by a reader for some kind of contest. Into 1951, we've got Walt Disney Monogatari, Walt Disney's story. Tezuka apparently wrote a biography about him. He also wrote Do Butsu Yakusen, Animal Baseball Game. He also started making manga calendars and New Year's postcards for 1952, both of which would continue throughout the years. 1952's got a couple things I'm not too sure about. He made a short manga called Michan, which looks to be about Tezuka star Michan pretending to be a doctor to cure a pig. There's some story called Shikari-kun, no other info. There's also a manga called Kinoko no Mura, Mushroom Village, also no info. He did the cover art for a book called Manga no Kanzume, a kid of manga, and then there's Uchu Ryoko, Space Travel, which I'll specify as being the 1952 Space Travel, because there's another from 1957. Online synopsis says it's about two mice going to space, almost running out of oxygen, and being saved by a man. The 57 one is Lost World? On to 53, we have Hananen Ate Daikensho, Guess the Culprit, which looks like some kind of game to play for a magazine. Hanachikai Ji-san, or Old Man Blooming, looks to be some kind of picture book. He did cover illustrations for something called Atsu Abadai, Oh Careful, Yondai no Horobasha, Four Covered Wagons, and Wa Yokubari Sukita, Wow, I Was Too Greedy. He did some illustrations titled Uchu Setu Shabarai no Yume, Space Station, A Dream of the Future, and finally for this year, there's a listing for a spin-off of Guchan and Paiko, under the title Guchan to Paiko Tommy-chan Kyodai, Siblings Guchan, Paiko-san, and Tammy-chan. 1954 continues the spin-offs with an offshoot of the Manga Blank franchise. We've had Manga University and Manga Classroom, and now we have Manga Tsushinbo, Manga News. Tezuka seems to be listed as a guest in this work, collaborating with Hiro Terada. It looks like he was a popular mangaka, but I'm not familiar with his work. I'm assuming there's more than one page of this, but that's all I found. Watashi wa Nandesho, What Am I, is something being described as a quiz manga. It looks like a riddle of sorts, describing a thing and letting the reader figure out what it is. He did an illustration called Fushigi no Kuri no Shogatsu de Alice, New Year in Wonderland, which is supposed to be on the back cover of this magazine. He did another New Year's card, and finally, a work called Nemure Ojo-sama, Sleep Well Princess. This is your reminder that Tezuka didn't just draw simple cartoons. That rounds out the scraps of 54, so let's get into the year proper, with the final year of this video. Chikyu no Akuma, or The Devil of the Earth, originally had the title Earth 1954, but was changed for some reason in later publishings. It's another nuclear war allegory. In a small village not known for much but their warship, the local Tanuki, a massive construction project has begun. Trucks come day in and day out all the time, and one day they hit a boy. His parents call Dr. Tezuka for help, but the traffic won't stop, and the boy dies. Enter Bon, a detective, investigating what the heck's happening in this town. It turns out a massive underground city is being built, a place safe from all possible future wars. But when the town's dissatisfaction meets a spy group trying to steal the underground city's technology, A pair of brothers in bond will get caught up in the turmoil and encounter a strange supernatural force, a demon. And to make things better, the boy from the start begins turning up alive. I wasn't the biggest fan of this one, I think because it felt a bit contrived. The idea of a small country town being unhappy when the government forces a big construction project is good, but when it's revealed all the townspeople are meant to move into the weirdly high-tech city and that everything will work out great for them, it's presented like the head scientist guy just didn't tell the town. This is a plot revolving around bad communication. Even with spies stoking the flames behind the scenes, it all just feels a bit forced. And then there's the demon stuff, which isn't a cop-out, it's just very weird. I liked the idea of two brothers fighting themselves on opposite ends, and the spies weaponizing the unhappy villagers is nice, but overall it's just not my favorite. Ford Sanjuni Nengata, or the 1932 Ford, is a story set in a world where cars are sentient. Old cars get depressed when new cars are better than them, and an old 1932 Ford, set to be decommissioned, gets one last hurrah as a crime fighter. Pretty simple story, not much else to say. Might be a cool concept if we go all in on the idea of sentient cars and what it's like to live with them. Tori Yosei Shoujo, the bird collar girl, is another picture story style manga, though only 4 pages long. It tells the story of a little girl who saves a bird from a spider. They become friends, and the girl's enchanted singing voice starts to attract many other birds. As the girl's fame grows, the little bird thinks she's forgotten it, so it flies away, the girl growing sick and lonely without her friend. On a snowy night, the bird learns of her sickness and returns, singing for the girl all night in the cold snow. Both pass during the night, and as they do, the bird is adorned in gold, and that is why canaries are yellow. Come to think of it, I haven't brought it up much, but Tezuka's mangas work infrequently in color, sometimes just shades of red, as was the style at the time, but it added an effect that's lost when not replicated. This is a case where I feel the art really suffers. This was a colorized work that just doesn't look as good in black and white. I get it's expensive, but I wish when they republish these, they'd keep the color. Next is Benkei, sometimes called Benkei the Enthusiastic One, based on the historical figure of the same name, who was a warrior monk in 1100s Japan. One day, on a particular bridge, Benkei appeared, challenging anyone carrying a sword to a duel, and taking said sword as his prize when he won. His goal? To collect 1,000 of them. Swords being a status symbol, this naturally ended up upsetting some high-ranking people, but no matter how many men they threw at him, they couldn't win. Benkei was just too strong. But one day, a man by the name of Minamoto no Yoshitsune appeared and defeated Benkei one sword short of his goal. Yoshitsune decides to recruit Benkei, and the two of them will fight in the Genpei War, with Benkei serving as his personal guard after their victory. But when Yoshitsune's older brother takes on the role of Lord, his paranoia causes the two to flee, and as history more often dictates, the story won't have a happy ending. Another period piece from Tezuka, this time it's based on history, or part history, part mythologized real person. Benkei's a popular story in Japan, his legend inspiring loyalty, and many plays and movies adapting it. It looks like Tezuka's version sticks pretty close to the traditional telling of the tale, but parts are left out, likely for pacing. The Benkei manga succeeds at giving us a likable main character. Benkei's a bit of a brute, but always well-meaning. But here's a quick question. Have you ever heard of the kabuki play Kanjincho? How about the no play Ataka? Maybe not, but they adapt a part of Benkei's story, where he, Yoshitsune, and his retainers disguise themselves as monks to sneak by an enemy. I told you Benkei had several plays about him. While Tezuka continues to be a theater nerd, cause when he gets to this part of the story, he frames it like a stage play. There's a background, an audience, and everything. Just a fun bit Tezuka decided to sneak in. As a matter of fact, Tezuka was a theater kid, and performed to some extent when he was a student. But I don't have much info on that, so I haven't really brought it up. But yeah, with that and the Takurusuka stuff, Tezuka was a theater nerd. He also says in interviews that he was inspired by Akira Kurosawa's The Men Who Tread on the Tiger's Tail. Oh yeah, this scene is also the first appearance of Tezuka star Sasaki Kojiro, who we'll see a decent amount of in the late 50s into the 60s. Overall, Benkei was a good read. I don't know what else to say besides Tezuka adapted the story as is, and it turned out well. Silk Hat Monogatari, or The Silk Hat Story, isn't just about a silk hat, but a bird. A mother bird worries about their nest not being suitable for the cold, so the father bird tries to find a replacement, deciding on a probably silken top hat. He's gonna try his hardest to get it, but it's gonna be a weird day with the hat and the bird inside being passed around and around. This one's light in terms of character and story. It's mostly just a fun, silly tale about a bird having a long and tiring day. Following that, we have Wonderkun, or Young Wonder. On a small island in Tokyo Bay is a community of stray dogs, and amongst the dogs lives a boy. This is Wonder, and no, that's not his real name. He was born Kantaro Nambu, and his world is about to change when he comes into a big inheritance. It turns out Wonder's parents were actually top scientists for the army during the Pacific War. They were forced to make deadly weapons, but deeply hated it. So they came up with a plan. For every weapon they made, they'd also make its perfect counter and spread the design, rendering all new weapons they made useless. They would end up being executed for this, but the World Peace Foundation rewarded them with millions, which now belong to Wonder. So Wonder gets the money, goes to school, swears to carry out his parents' will, and then the plot revolves around a shady group trying to build a nuclear factory in Tokyo to construct bombs. Another anti-war manga, Young Wonder is alright. I like the backstory for Wonder's parents and his initially untrusting nature and trying to figure out what he wants to do with his life. Then the nuclear factory plot kicks in and there's a bit of a shift. Wonder discovers the nuclear plot, but it's hard for him to deal with it because he's up against a group of powerful people. He knows exactly who the bad guys are, but he can't actually arrest them or anything. There's no proof of crime. It's a good angle that gives us a back and forth conflict, but unfortunately, the bad guys are just boring, generic, evil bad guys. Not that there has to be much nuance to corrupt politicians trying to make a weapons factory, but the villains just really aren't interesting. Maybe with some added complexity I like it more, but as it is, it just doesn't stand out to me as anything special. Another work that maybe should have gotten the barely any info on section is Tetsuro no Shirobara, White Rose on the Railway. The whole thing is just a single page, with barely any dialogue. It has something to do with the boy and his dad finding a rose growing alongside a railway. The dad tries to grow it, and the boy adds a fake flower to try and make his dad happy. When the local florist comes to investigate, an accident happens leading to the dad dying, and then the boy comes to see the rose grew after all, though really it was just the florist planting a rose there. Time for another series aimed at girls, with Nasumi Joo, Queen Nasubi, or fully translated, Queen Eggplant. It opens on graduation day when 3 young girls are parting ways, Takako, Nasubi, and Fujiko. In truth, we mainly follow Takako and Nasubi though, so don't worry too much about Fujiko. The 3 of them meet under the school tree, knowing they're about to separate, with Nasubi going back to the countryside, and agree to meet back here when they're older. They part ways, and we start to follow Takako. Takako's dream is to become a ballerina dancer, and though her home life is poor, a chance encounter leads her on the path. Over with Nasubi in the country, she saves a ginkgo tree from being cut down, and as thanks, a goddess assigns a fox to make her dreams come true. What dream in particular? To become a queen. Nasubi makes her way back to the city just in time for a group of thugs to kidnap Takako for ransom. But while the situation gets resolved, Nasubi ends up being the one kidnapped and shipped off to Taiwan by pirates. She ends up finding a captive princess who looks like her and agrees to swap places so she can escape. Then people from the princess's country find her, think Nasubi's the princess, and in a roundabout way, she's on track to become queen. Meanwhile, Takako's ballet career continues as she works hard to get roles while dealing with competition from her peers. Also, sometimes Fujiko shows up. Queen Nasubi gives itself the difficult task of balancing 2 separate plot lines in a single story. Being the title of the manga, the one revolving around Nasubi is a bit more important, but Takako's ballet career is still a large focus. And to Tezuka's credit, I think he does a good job. Both stories kept me interested, and going back and forth between the 2 kept things fresh. One was more grounded, dealing with realistic struggles, and another one was more fantastical. This easily could have been a mess, but I think Queen Nasubi was well written. In his interviews about it though, Tezuka seems to indicate Nasubi becoming a princess was a change to make her role more flashy and appealing when initial readers didn't like her much. He had seen the 1953 film The Prisoner of Zenda and took some inspiration from it, hence the name of the character Zenda and his design being based on James Mason. I wonder how different the original draft of this was. It looks like this series was meant to be inspirational to the girls reading it, a follow your dreams kind of message. It shows that there will be hardships along the way, but that you can accomplish your goal if you try hard and stay your course. I thought this was nice, especially compared to another War is Bad manga. Look, Tezuka writes a lot of them and they get a little repetitive. Thankfully, the same can't quite be said of his period pieces. Natsukusa Monogatari Tales of Summer Grass is a short read, but a good one. Taking place in the Age of Samurai, Kunugi Naramaru has killed an enemy soldier. This should be routine, but afterwards, he just doesn't feel good. His lord had promised a reward for the man's head, but when he goes back on it, Kunugi thinks about the man's family. His death was pointless, and now his son is fatherless. He goes to their home to deliver the news, and without telling them it's his fault, he fills in as man of the house. Unfortunately, loose lips reveal the truth, and the young boy Hyoma starts to plan his revenge on his father's killer. But then, after the boy's nighttime trade is discovered, Kunugi offers to train the young Hyoma himself. Teaching him the way of the sword so that he may one day die by it, they become a begrudging adoptive family. The story is probably typical of the genre, but it's effective. A found family story mixed with a revenge plot. It's good stuff. Could easily be a movie. Tales of Summer Grass may not be long, but it's short and sweet. And from one side of the world to the other, we go from east to west with Kuroi Kyokoku, Black Canyon. Between the Colorado River and the Rio Grande lies an uninhabited area of mountainous peaks, where the Black Canyon resides. A local man named Rumble has made it his goal to trek a path through the canyon and create a shortcut to St. Louis. Putting up a job posting with a monetary reward, he contracts Chuck Cheney, a kid who never skipped going to the gym, a trio of bandits and Condor, Hyena, and Puma, an old businessman and his daughter Martine, and Wild Hand, a wanted man for the murder of several people. Joined by Lamp, a partner of Rumble, they set off to make a pathway for the people, and they're sure to face hardships along the way, considering 12 expeditions have failed before. With an ensemble cast, this is another short adventure, and with a more serious tone. It really leverages the tension of traveling through the mountains. The role of main character is split between Chuck and Wild Hand, and they're both decent leads, but the other cast members are also given a scene or two each. I'm also obligated to mention Tezuka made Martine dressed as a man, like he does with almost all his other Wild West girls. Black Canyon was decent for what it is, another solid western from Tezuka. Time for another detective story. We haven't had one of those in a bit, but this time around it's not Rock, who's been the go-to for the role more lately, and it's also not Bon. No, this time we're following Kenichi Tanteicho, Chief Detective Kenichi. And if I could draw your attention to the title, it's not Kenichi, but Kenichi, as in Ken, followed by the Japanese word for one, Ichi. Tezuka made a weird pun here. The series follows the Kenichi we know and love in the role of boy detective. Kenichi hasn't been the protagonist as much lately, and according to Tezuka, he made this partially to get the character in the spotlight again. Despite being 13 years old, he's surprisingly competent. A master of disguise, he has the help of his crow companion Acorn. The mysteries and writing tend to be pretty good, especially when Kenichi gets a rival in the thief Mouseboy, whose disguises surpassed even his own. This is a fun series for young boys to read. In one story, Kenichi will find an Indian treasure, and in another he'll get involved with a martial arts criminal group. There's some good variety, but I have a bit of an issue with it. A stupid issue, but an issue nonetheless. I know I shouldn't be taking a children's manga too seriously, but Kenichi is stated as 13 years old, and he holds his own in fistfights against trained grown adults no problem. Now, that's not new to Tezuka's works, or manga in general, but Kenichi being a boy detective doesn't really matter. He feels like a tiny adult. I just think he should lose most of his fights and rely on his wits instead of being a weirdly strong child. We also see an appearance of Tezuka star Marukubi Boon. I say and because either this or a chapter of Mighty Atom is his first appearance. Since I'm not certain on the initial publication dates of each of these chapters, I'm just gonna say he appears here and move on. I can't fully say I liked Chief Detective Kenichi, because my brain just couldn't stop bothering me, but I can tell when something is otherwise a solid manga. Chief Detective Kenichi would run until 1956, but I actually saw a small continuation as a newspaper strip in 59, titled Kenichi Tanteicho, spelt without the one. Chief Detective Kenichi 1959 edition is just more of the same. Kenichi's a detective, he solves mysteries, they're a bit shorter this time. Moving on. Oh. we're here now. So when you clicked on this video, you may have known Mighty Atom, you may have known Jungle Emperor, Princess Knight, you might even know future Tezuka works like Blackjack or Dororo. Those are certainly famous Tezuka series, but here, in 1954, we have something special. A little manga called Hino Tori, or Phoenix, would be published, and this is the beginning of Tezuka's lifelong work, his masterpiece out of all his other manga. Now, you may not believe me, because if you don't know, you don't know, but this isn't the proper time to discuss this. Phoenix gets its own video, as you probably assumed, and you'll have to be patient until then. You may be wondering about a summary or base premise, but that doesn't really work well for Phoenix. The premise of Phoenix as a series is that there's a phoenix. Trust me, that's basically it. What I can tell you for now is that this initial version of the story didn't catch on, and Tezuka would need to revisit it to really get it going. Phoenix is going to be a trickier series to talk about. I haven't written that script yet, and I'm not sure how to go about it at this time. For now, it's time for another historical piece, this time titled and about Goto Watabe. The story starts during a battle, I think the Battle of Domyoji. Goto Watabe is tearing through enemy soldiers on a quest to kill Tokugawa Ieyasu on behalf of Toyotomi Hideyori. He almost does it, but Ieyasu manages to slip away, and one of Ieyasu's retainers charges Watabe, flashing back to the time they first met. Goto Watabe seems like a pitiful, greedy man, asking for a large amount of land to be hired as a samurai. After Watabe takes down a corrupt noble, the POV character we saw before, Mori Kazushige, begins to follow him to find out if he's as bad as people say. The pair will fight corruption and will come to learn Watabe's true nature, but in the end, they land on opposite sides of the war, and we know the two will end up facing each other in the battlefield. This manga was fine, but it just didn't grab me like other similar works like Benkei. I'm also pretty removed from the cultural knowledge of Tezuka's intended reader base and had no idea who Goto Watabe was before I read this. Maybe if I did, I'd have a better opinion of this work, but as is, it's just another period piece that's not as interesting as the others. Next is the short story of Robin-chan, or Little Robin. It follows a young girl named Ruri on an island, who's bossed around by this baron, who is put in charge while her brother's away. She's also been driven temporarily mute. One day, a ship arrives and we meet Robin, an attractive and seemingly quite wealthy young man. Robin goes to meet the Baron and offers him a ton of treasure for his rare pet fish. After being asked to go get more, Ruri leaves with Robin to go find her brother, and she comes to realize he's not an average person. The story of Little Robin is only 15 pages long, so without spoiling it, there's not much else I can say. In terms of quality, it's alright, though its length means its pacing can be a bit brisk. Sekai o Horobosu Otoko, the man who would destroy the world, certainly has a very grand name. Whether or not it deserves it, I'll leave up to you. The plot revolves around a future war in Japan against some enemy nation. Ichinotani Ryoichi is our main character, and uniquely, he's played by Adam. It's hard to tell without the hair, but look at his face, that's him. Tezuka gives Adam cameo roles, but rarely puts him in as the main character of another manga. But back to the plot, Ryoichi's brother dies in battle, and he in turn becomes a fighter pilot, but he's also given a special mission to take down the enemy ace that flies the deadly Antares, who's also the one who killed Ryoichi's brother. Driven by duty and revenge, he trains hard, and miraculously, he takes the Antares down. But with his own plane damaged, both pilots end up landing on an island, and the two need to live together while the war rages on. In another anti-war work by Tezuka, this one focuses more on soldiers compared to a deadly superweapon. It feels a lot more personal, as we see the training and pressure they all go through for their country. I think this approach works in the manga's favor and helps it stand out a bit. Not my favorite if I'm being honest, but not bad at all. Biko no Amori, Biko's babysitting, introduces us to the little bee girl Biko. It follows her being asked to look after an infant caterpillar. A cute 4-page story that shows how Tezuka's love for insects, Biko will later start in a picture book in 1957. Ryuga Fuji no Otome is called the girl by the dragon pool in English, but sometimes also the maid of Tatsuka Fuji. It's a short period piece following two princesses disguising themselves as samurai. Their father has fallen ill, and the two of them need to find a hidden gem that symbolizes lordship. If they fail to find it, or their enemies do, they could be dethroned and killed. But the legend says the gem is guarded by a dragon, so it won't be that easy to get. This one feels like it's based on a Japanese folktale or legend, but I didn't see anything saying it was. Correct me if I'm wrong. I would say I like this manga, but it ends up losing points with me. The two princesses seem like good characters, but they actually don't do much. A wandering swordsman ends up doing most of the work, and basically becomes the main character instead. I would have liked it better if this random guy wasn't here, but for what it is, it's still decent. But finally, we reached the end of 1954, as I introduce you to the last topic of this video, Tange Sazen. This was one heck of a rabbit hole that I didn't allow myself to get lost in, but boy could I have. You've probably never heard of Tange Sazen if you don't live in Japan, but over there, he's a big multimedia franchise all the way from 1927. Originally appearing as a side character in the book Suzuki Genjiro no Maki by Hayashi Fudo, his personality and striking one-eye, one-arm appearance was so popular that by the time Tezuka made his own adaptation in 54, there were over 20 movies about him. Tange Sazen was a big deal. It has modern adaptations into the 2000s. Now, I don't exactly have over 20 really old Japanese movies on hand with English subtitles, so I can't fully know the context of the character Tezuka had when he was writing this version. But very luckily, I was able to find the 1935 movie Tange Sazen yo wa Hyakuma Ryo no Subo, Tange Sazen and the Million Ryo Pot. Because at the very least, this movie informs Tezuka's version, because they adapt the same story. Now, maybe there were earlier versions of it, I don't know where this particular Tange Sazen story originates, but there's clear similarities between this manga and the movie. So before I talk about Tezuka's version, I'm gonna go over the movie a bit. Taking place in the age of samurai, a lord has discovered an old family heirloom pot secretly had a treasure map to 1,000,000 ryo inside of it. I don't know the exchange rate for modern currency, but it's a large amount of money. Now before he knew that, it just seemed like an old ugly pot, so he gifted it to his brother living in Edo. They try to get the pot back, but the brother, Genzaburo, clues in that something's up and refuses. Too bad his wife just sold it to a junk seller and no one knows where the pot is. It ends up in the hands of the child Yasu, whose father gets killed by some thugs, and he basically gets adopted by the mistress of a bar, and Tange. Now, apparently, before this movie, Tange was characterized as a nihilist and not a great person. But over time, and apparently especially in this film, his character changed to be more heroic, and in this case, a gruff, lazy, but warm-hearted man. The movie has him becoming a father figure to young Yasu, while a bunch of hijinks happen with people trying to find the pot. This isn't a super serious action-filled movie though. Genzaburo isn't even seriously looking for the pot. He's using it as an excuse to go out and have fun instead of being with his wife all day. So Tezuka had at least this to go off of, and I think it's safe to say it was an influence. According to interviews, his first challenge was actually designing Tange to not have a gruesome character design, so he made him a little dopey to balance out his giant scar. The manga likewise starts with people hunting down a pot with a secret map in it. A thief of sorts buys it from a junk seller, misplaces it with the Yamsula Yasu, and when the two of them get into a scuffle, they fall into Tange's boat. Tange scares off the thief, returns the pot to Yasu, and Yasu just asks Tange to become his dad because he doesn't have one and thinks he's a nice guy. Tange actually goes for it, and the two become family. Tange here is even more friendly and heroic than the 35 movie already made him. He's a pretty chill guy despite his intimidating appearance. After this, we get introduced to a plotline involving a local dojo that a version of Genzaburo is taking over, and people scheming to take it for themselves. Genzaburo here is nothing like his movie counterpart, being a capable fighter, brave, and actively trying to get the pot. With him and Tange forming a rivalry, the thief trying to get the pot, the dojo plotline, and other things going on, this is a much more complex story. So complex, this is only the first part of it. Tange Sazen had a sequel manga in 1955, titled Tange Sazen Kennen Kunryu no Maki, The Tale of Kennen Kunryu. Tezuka was supposed to make it, writing the initial story and drawing a couple of pages, but the story goes that he got very sick, and so he ghost wrote the sequel while his assistants did all the work. I couldn't find it to read it myself, so no comment on its quality, but it does leave us at a tricky point in judging the original. With an incomplete story, it's hard for me to take Tange Sazen and call it good. It's a setup that I don't have the payoff for. It's got one or two fun action scenes in it, and a funny part where Genzaburo loses a fight and the author rewinds the manga to do it right. but by itself, it's just alright. At least it let me know about another potential meteor rabbit hole to get lost in someday. And with that, we leave 1954, taking us halfway through the 50s and to our stopping point for now. I think this video's gone on long enough, and we've certainly covered a lot of things. Some weren't really noteworthy, but others definitely were. Heck, there's now 5 solo series videos on the docket. Jungle Emperor, Mighty Atom, My Son Goku, Princess Knight, and Phoenix. Will the rest of the 50s compare? Probably not, if I'm being honest. But I'll let you be the judge of that next time on our journey through the works of Osamu Tezuka.